The knife scraped against Elena Voss's plate before she even realized her hand was shaking. Every eye in the grand hall of the Blackthorn estate seemed to slide past her, as if she were a smudge on the polished floor rather than a guest. She set the knife down and folded her hands in her lap, trying to disappear into the high-backed chair that had been pushed to the farthest corner of the feast table, past the last candle, past the last plate of gold trim, into the shadows where the servants usually stood. She had not wanted to come. She had said so, 3 times, to her cousin Marisol, who had begged her to fill an empty seat at the last moment, because a distant invitation had been wasted, and someone needed to sit in it, or the seating chart would look uneven to the Blackthorn stewards. Elena had agreed, only because Marisol's voice had cracked with worry, and because refusing felt like more trouble than simply borrowing a plain green dress and slipping into a room full of strangers for one night. Now she understood her mistake. The founding feast of the Blackthorn Pack was not an ordinary gathering. Elena had grown up on the edge of Packland, far from titles and old bloodlines, and she had heard about this feast only in passing, the way people speak of royal weddings they will never attend. Tonight the hall glowed with 100 candles, and the long table stretched so far that she could barely see the high seat where the Alpha sat, cold and composed, greeting lords and ladies, who bowed as if he were carved from stone, rather than born of flesh. His name was Kellen Blackthorn, and even from this distance, even through the noise and perfume and laughter, Elena could feel something about him that unsettled her. He did not smile. He accepted every greeting with a short nod, his dark eyes moving over the room like a man counting exits rather than a man enjoying his own celebration. Beside him sat an older woman, with silver hair pinned in an elegant crown, her posture straight as a blade, her gaze sharp enough to cut through marble. That, Elena had been told in a hushed whisper by the woman seated 2 chairs down, was Lady Seraphina, the Queen Mother, mother to the Alpha, and the most respected woman in the entire pack. Elena picked at her food without appetite. She heard snippets of conversation drift toward her from nearby seats, comments about her dress being too plain, her hair too simple, her name unfamiliar to anyone of consequence. A young woman in a deep crimson gown laughed behind a raised hand and said something about charity guests being seated too close to the family table this year. Elena's cheeks burned, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than defending herself to people who had already decided who she was. She counted the minutes. Dessert would come soon, and after dessert there would be dancing, and during the dancing she could slip toward the doors unnoticed and walk home under the stars, grateful to never see this hall again. She had almost convinced herself the night was survivable, when a hush moved through the room like a cold wind before a storm. Lady Seraphina had risen from her seat. The conversation around the table died in pieces, table by table, until the only sound left was the soft crackle of the candles and the distant clink of a dropped fork somewhere near the doors. The Queen Mother did not move quickly. She never seemed to. She simply stood, smoothed the front of her deep blue gown, and let her gaze travel slowly across the hall, as if she were searching for something she already knew she would find. Elena felt a strange pull in her chest, the kind of feeling she usually ignored, like a held breath she hadn't noticed she was holding. She told herself it was nerves. She told herself it was nothing. Then Lady Seraphina's eyes found her. For a moment, Elena thought she had imagined it, that the Queen Mother's gaze had simply passed over her the way everyone else's did, sliding off without pausing. But the older woman did not look away. She held Elena's eyes across the enormous length of the hall, and something flickered across her expression, something between recognition and wonder, the look of a person who has been waiting a long time for a door to finally open. Elena's heartbeat quickened. She glanced behind her, certain the Queen Mother must be looking at someone else, someone seated near her, someone important. There was no one, only the wall, and a single unlit candle, and Elena herself, frozen in her chair like a bird caught in an open field. "I have waited a long time," Lady Seraphina said, and her voice, though not loud, carried through the hall with the ease of a woman accustomed to being heard. "Many of you know that on the night of my son's birth, our family elder told me a bond would come to him unlike any other. A true bond, not chosen, not arranged, found." A murmur rippled through the crowd, uneasy and curious at once. Elena saw heads turn toward the high table, toward Kellen, whose jaw had gone tight, whose hand had stilled around the stem of his glass. "For years, I believed this might never happen, the Queen Mother continued. I believed perhaps the elder was wrong, or perhaps fate had chosen a different path for my son. But tonight, in this hall, among all of you, I feel what I was told I would feel. The pull of the bond. The scent that does not belong to any of the names on tonight's guest list, and yet belongs here more than any of them. Elena's mouth had gone dry. She wanted to shrink further into her chair, to become smaller than she already felt, but something in her would not let her look away from the Queen Mother's steady gaze. Lady Seraphina lifted one hand and pointed, not dramatically, not with flourish, but with the calm certainty of a woman stating a simple fact. Your fated Luna is here, she said. That young woman, seated at the end of the table. She is the one the bond has chosen for my son. For a moment, nothing happened. The words seemed to hang in the air, unclaimed, as if the entire hall was waiting for someone to laugh and reveal it as a joke. Then every head in the room turned at once, a wave of movement, and gasps, and whispered questions, until Elena felt the full weight of hundreds of eyes pressing down on her like a physical thing. She could not breathe. She wanted to stand, to explain that there had been some mistake, that she was no one, that she had only come because her cousin needed a favor, that she did not belong in this hall, let alone at the center of an announcement that had clearly shattered every plan the Blackthorn pack had carefully built for tonight. But her legs would not obey her. She sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table, while the whispers around her grew louder and sharper. That's absurd, someone said from a nearby table, not bothering to lower their voice. She's no one. Look at her. She isn't even pack nobility. The Queen Mother must be mistaken, said another voice, though it carried less certainty than the speaker probably intended. Elena's gaze finally broke away from Lady Seraphina and found the high seat, found Kellen Blackthorn, whose expression had gone through several changes in the span of a few seconds, settling finally into something unreadable, somewhere between disbelief and quiet fury. He was staring at her the way a man stares at an unexpected storm cloud on a clear day, calculating how much damage it might do before it passes. Their eyes met, and Elena felt that same strange pull she had felt earlier, stronger now, impossible to explain away as nerves or imagination. It was as if an invisible thread had been looped around her ribs and drawn taut, connecting her to the man at the far end of the table, who looked at her as though she had personally ruined his evening. She wanted to look away. She could not. Mother, Kellen said, his voice low but carrying easily in the silence. This is not the place. It is exactly the place, Lady Seraphina replied, unbothered by the edge in her son's tone. The bond does not wait for convenient timing, Kellen. You know this as well as I do. A woman near the front of the hall stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Elena recognized her, though only vaguely, from earlier whispers around the table. Priya Sinclair, daughter of a neighboring Pax Alpha, dressed in gold silk that caught the candlelight with every movement. Her expression had shifted from polite composure to something sharp and wounded. This is a mistake, Priya said, her voice tight. Everyone in this hall knows the arrangement between our families. This girl cannot simply be declared Luna because of a feeling. It is not a feeling, child, Lady Seraphina said, and though her tone remained gentle, there was steel beneath it. It is the bond. I have carried the gift of sensing it since before you were born. I do not make such claims lightly, and I would not stand in front of this entire hall to embarrass my own son, unless I was certain. Elena finally found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. I think there has been a mistake, she said, aware that her words barely carried past the nearest tables. I'm not anyone important. I only came because my cousin needed the seat filled. A ripple of laughter, cruel and quick, moved through parts of the crowd. Elena felt her face flush hot with humiliation, and for a moment, she considered simply standing up and walking out of the hall, mistake or not, announcement or not, and never looking back. She did not care about titles or bonds or fate. She cared about getting through this night without being torn apart by strangers who had already decided she was an intruder. But before she could rise, Lady Seraphina moved down from the high table, walking the length of the hall with unhurried grace, every step drawing the room's attention along with her. She stopped only a few feet from Elena's chair and studied her with an expression that held none of the mockery Elena had braced herself for. Instead, There was something almost tender in the older woman's eyes, something that made Elena's throat tighten unexpectedly. "What is your name, child?" Lady Serafina asked, quietly enough now that only those nearby could hear. "Elena," she managed. "Elena Voss." "Elena." The Queen Mother repeated the name as though testing its weight, as though matching it against some private memory. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you did not come here tonight expecting your life to change. But I would not have spoken if I were not certain, and I am asking you now, not as the Queen Mother of this pack, but as a woman who has waited many years for this moment, to trust that what I sensed in you is real." Elena glanced past her toward Kellen, who had risen from the high seat but had not yet moved, his hands braced against the table as if he needed the support. He did not look at her with warmth or welcome. He looked at her the way a man looks at an unexpected complication in a plan he had spent years building, and something in Elena's chest sank at the sight of it. "He doesn't want this," Elena said quietly, more to herself than to the Queen Mother, but Lady Serafina heard her anyway. "My son does not yet understand what he wants," the Queen Mother replied, "but the bond does not ask his permission, any more than it asked yours. Give it time, Elena, that is all I ask." Around them, the hall had begun to fracture into smaller conversations, some furious, some fascinated, some already calculating what this meant for alliances and futures that had been planned for years. Priya Sinclair had not moved from where she stood, her hands clenched at her sides, her eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that made Elena's skin prickle with unease. Somewhere near the doors, a group of young nobles whispered behind their hands, glancing at Elena's plain dress and simple hairstyle, as though trying to solve a puzzle that refused to make sense. Elena felt the room pressing in on her, too many eyes, too many voices, too much weight settling onto shoulders that had never carried anything heavier than a basket of firewood, or a worry about paying rent on time. She had come to this feast as a favor, invisible and unimportant, and within the span of a few sentences, she had become the center of a controversy she did not understand, and had never asked for. "Please," she said, looking up at Lady Serafina with something close to desperation. "I don't know anything about bonds, or Luna, or any of this. I think you should choose someone else, someone who understands what you're asking." "The bond does not choose based on understanding," Lady Serafina said gently. "It chooses based on truth. You will come to understand, in time, that this was never a mistake." Kellen finally stepped down from the high table, his long strides carrying him across the hall with a controlled tension that made several guests instinctively step back to give him room. He stopped beside his mother, his gaze flicking briefly to Elena, before settling on Lady Serafina with an intensity that bordered on anger. "Mother, we cannot simply declare this in front of the entire pack based on a feeling," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the murmuring crowd. "There are alliances at stake. There are agreements that were made in good faith. Agreements made before the bond revealed itself mean nothing when weighed against a true bond, and you know this," Lady Serafina replied, unmoved by her son's frustration. "You have always known the day might come. I am simply telling you that it has." Elena watched the exchange with a growing sense of unreality, as though she were observing someone else's life through a pane of glass. She did not belong in this conversation. She did not belong in this hall, at this table, in this pack. And yet the pull she had felt when Kellen's eyes first met hers across the room had not faded. If anything, standing this close to him now, she could feel it more clearly, an invisible current running beneath her skin, insistent and strange, and impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Kellen turned to her at last, and for a moment, the mask of controlled irritation slipped just slightly, revealing something more uncertain underneath. He studied her face, as though searching for an explanation, some proof that his mother's claim could not possibly be true. But whatever he was looking for, he did not seem to find it. "You didn't ask for this," he said quietly, and it was not quite an apology, but it was not dismissal either. "No," Elena admitted, "I didn't." "Then we are in agreement about at least one thing," he said, and though his tone remained guarded, there was no cruelty in it. Priya Sinclair's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "This cannot stand," she said, striding forward, until she stood only a few feet from them, her golden dress catching the candlelight with every sharp movement. "Kellen, you made a promise to my family. Our packs have built an alliance around this marriage for years. You cannot let some unknown girl, and a claim of fate undo everything. No decision has been made tonight beyond what my mother has said, Kellen replied, his voice hardening again as he turned to face Priya. A bond claim must be verified. Nothing is decided until it is. And if it is verified? Priya asked, her voice trembling now. Whether from anger or fear, Elena could not tell. What then? Kellen did not answer. He looked instead at Elena, and in his silence Elena felt the full weight of what tonight had set in motion. A weight far too heavy for a girl who had only wanted to eat her dinner in a quiet corner and disappear before anyone noticed she was there. The hall around them buzzed with speculation, alliances already fracturing and reforming in whispered conversations, and Elena understood, with a sinking certainty, that whatever happened next, her old life, the quiet, unnoticed life she had known that morning, was already gone. She glanced once more at Lady Serafina, whose expression held a strange mixture of triumph and sympathy, and then at Kellen, whose dark eyes had not left her face. Somewhere deep inside her, beneath the fear and the confusion, something had already begun to shift, though Elena was not yet ready to name what it was. She only knew that whatever waited for her beyond this hall, she would not be facing it as the invisible girl who had slipped into a borrowed seat. She would be facing it as a name spoken aloud in front of an entire pack, a name that could not be unspoken now, no matter how badly she wished it could. The Queen Mother reached out and gently took Elena's hand, and despite everything, despite the fear coiling tight in her chest, Elena did not pull away. Elena did not sleep that night. She lay in the small guest room the stewards had hurried her into after the feast, a room with tall windows and a bed far too large for one person, and she stared at the ceiling, while her mind replayed every second of the hall, the whispers, the golden dress, the pull she had felt when Kellen's eyes met hers. By the time dawn light crept across the floor, she had convinced herself of exactly nothing, except that leaving quietly before anyone woke seemed like the safest plan she had. She was wrong about that too. A soft knock came at her door, just as she finished lacing her boots. When she opened it, she found not a steward, but Lady Serafina herself, dressed simply this morning in pale gray, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, in a way that made her look less like a queen and more like an ordinary woman who had also not slept much. "You were planning to leave," the Queen Mother said. It was not a question. Elena's cheeks warmed. "I thought it might be easier, for everyone." "It would be easier," Lady Serafina agreed, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. "It would also be a mistake, and I think you already know that, or you would have left before I knocked." Elena said nothing, because the older woman was right, and there seemed little point in denying it. She sat on the edge of the bed while Lady Serafina settled into the chair by the window, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "I owe you an explanation," the Queen Mother said. "Last night was not the way I intended for you to learn any of this. I had hoped to speak with you privately first, to prepare you, but the bond made itself known so strongly the moment you entered that hall that I could not stay silent. I am sorry for the shock of it." "You could have just told me quietly," Elena said, "instead of announcing it to the entire pack." "If I had told you quietly, my son would have found a way to dismiss it," Lady Serafina said, and there was no apology in her tone now, only calm certainty. "Kellen has spent years building his life around duty rather than feeling. He agreed to the arrangement with the Sinclair family because it made sense on paper, because it strengthened old alliances, because he believed love and bonds were luxuries he could not afford as an alpha. If I had not spoken in front of the entire hall, he would have quietly asked me to forget what I sensed, and I would have watched him marry a woman his heart was never truly tied to." Elena studied her hands, unsure what to say to that. It was not her place to have opinions about Kellen's heart, or his marriage, or any of the tangled politics she had stumbled into by accident, and yet she found herself asking anyway, "Does he want this? Any of this?" "I don't know," Lady Serafina admitted. "My son has not wanted much of anything for himself in a long time. He wants what is best for the pack. Whether he believes you are what is best for the pack remains to be seen, and that is not something I can decide for him." A silence settled between them, not entirely uncomfortable, though Elena's stomach still felt tight with uncertainty. Finally, Lady Serafina rose and smoothed the front of her dress. "There is a way to know for certain whether the bond is true," she said. "An old ritual, rarely used, because true bonds are rare enough that most packs never need it. It involves a trial of proximity and trust between you and Kellen. If the bond is real, it will confirm itself beyond any doubt, and no one in this pack, not Priya Sinclair, not the Council, not even Kellen himself, will be able to deny it. And if it isn't real? Elena asked. If you were wrong? Then you will be free to return to your life, and I will apologize to you for the disruption I caused, Lady Serafina said simply. But I do not believe I am wrong, Elena. I have sensed bonds before, weaker ones, arranged ones dressed up to look like fate. I have never felt anything like what passed through this hall last night. Elena thought of the invisible thread she had felt pulling taut across the distance between herself and Kellen, the way her heartbeat had quickened without her permission, the way she had been unable to look away from his eyes even as humiliation burned through her. She wanted to dismiss it as nerves, as the strange energy of an unfamiliar and overwhelming night, but some quiet part of her recognized it as something she had never felt before, something she could not fully explain away. All right, she said finally. I'll do the trial, but only because I want this settled. Not because I believe any of it is true. Lady Serafina's expression softened into something almost like relief. That is all I ask. The trial was arranged for that evening, in a private chamber deep within the estate, away from the prying eyes and sharp whispers of the pack's nobility. Elena spent the day wandering the gardens, trying to steady her nerves, while servants cast curious glances her way, and pretended not to whisper about her the moment she passed. She caught fragments of conversation everywhere she went, some sympathetic, most skeptical, a few openly hostile. By the time evening arrived, she felt as though she had been picked apart and reassembled a dozen times over. Kellen was already waiting in the chamber when she arrived, standing near a low table set with 2 carved wooden bowls and a collection of items Elena did not recognize. He had changed out of the formal attire from the previous night into simpler dark clothing, and without the crowd around him, without the weight of his position pressing down on his shoulders, he looked younger than she had first thought, and more tired. You didn't have to agree to this, he said as she stepped into the room, the door closing softly behind her. My mother can be persuasive. If you wanted to leave, I could arrange it. I know, Elena said, but I'd rather know the truth than spend the rest of my life wondering if I ran from something real, or spend it wondering if I stayed for something false. Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or something closer to respect. He gestured toward the low table, where an elder Elena had not noticed stood quietly near the far wall, an ancient woman, with silver eyes, and a face lined with decades of memory. This is Mira, Kellen said. She has performed the bond trial before, though rarely. She will guide us through it. Mira stepped forward and studied Elena carefully, the way one might study a puzzle piece before deciding where it belonged. The trial requires trust, she said, her voice raspy but clear. You will each drink from a bowl containing an old herb blend that heightens the senses. Then you will stand close, hands joined, and let your instincts guide you. If the bond is true, you will feel it as a shared pulse, a shared breath, something neither of you can fake or force. If it is not true, you will feel nothing beyond the herbs themselves. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the bowl offered to her. She glanced at Kellen, who held his own bowl with steady hands, though his jaw remained tight with tension. Ready? He asked. No, Elena admitted, but let's do it anyway. A ghost of something that might have been amusement crossed his face before he drank from the bowl. Elena followed a moment later, the taste bitter and strange on her tongue, spreading warmth through her chest almost immediately. The room seemed to shift slightly, colors sharpening, sounds growing clearer, the low hum of candlelight suddenly audible in a way it had not been before. Mira guided them to stand facing each other, close enough that Elena could see the faint gold flecks in Kellen's dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. Join hands, Mira instructed. Do not force anything. Simply let yourselves feel. Elena reached out, and Kellen met her halfway, his hand closing around hers with careful gentleness, as though he expected her to pull away at any moment. The instant their palms touched, something surged through Elena's body, a warmth far beyond what the herbs alone could explain, a pulse that seemed to beat in time with her own heart, but did not originate from within her. She gasped, and across from her, Kellen's breath caught as well, his eyes widening slightly, before his expression shuddered again, retreating behind careful control. The pulse between them grew steadier, stronger, until Elena could have sworn she felt his heartbeat as clearly as her own, could feel some invisible thread drawing tight between them, exactly as it had in the hall the night before, only now undeniable, now impossible to dismiss as imagination. Mira watched them both with quiet satisfaction. "The bond is true," she said softly. "I have not seen a connection this strong in many years." Kellen did not release Elena's hand immediately. He stared at her instead, something raw and unguarded moving behind his eyes, before he caught himself and stepped back, breaking the connection with visible effort. The warmth in Elena's chest faded slightly without his touch, though it did not disappear entirely, leaving behind a strange ache she did not have words for. "It's confirmed then," Kellen said, his voice rougher than before. "There's no more room for doubt." "None," Mira agreed. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm chamber, overwhelmed by what she had just felt, and unsure what it meant for the life she had known only 2 days earlier. Kellen watched her with an expression she could not quite read, somewhere between resignation and something gentler, something he seemed unwilling to name. "I need time," he said finally, more to himself than to her. "This changes things I had already decided." "I understand," Elena said, though she was not certain she did. "No," Kellen said, meeting her eyes again. "I don't think either of us understands yet, but we will have to figure it out together, whether we want to or not." Outside the chamber, the pack's evening settled into darkness, and somewhere beyond the estate walls, word of the confirmed bond had already begun spreading through whispered conversations and hurried messages, reaching ears that would not welcome the news, including a golden-dressed woman whose fury had only just begun to take shape. The days that followed felt like living inside someone else's story. Elena was given a room in the eastern wing of the Blackthorn estate, far grander than anything she had ever slept in, with silk curtains and a fireplace that never seemed to need tending, because servants appeared and vanished so quietly she rarely saw them do it. She was fitted for new dresses she had not asked for, taught the proper way to greet visiting nobles, and corrected, gently but firmly, whenever she used the wrong fork or curtsied a moment too late. None of it felt like her life. All of it felt like a costume she had been forced into without her consent. She missed her small cottage on the edge of Packland, the creak of the floorboards she knew by heart, the smell of her own cooking, rather than meals prepared by strangers in a kitchen the size of her old home. She missed Marisol, who had sent one anxious letter since the feast, full of apologies and questions Elena did not yet know how to answer. Mostly, she missed the simple certainty of knowing exactly who she was and where she belonged, a certainty that had vanished the moment Lady Serafina rose from her seat at the feast. Kellen, for his part, kept his distance. Elena saw him occasionally at meals, seated across the long table, with the same unreadable expression he had worn the night they first met, exchanging polite but brief words, before retreating to whatever duties consumed his days. She told herself she did not mind. She told herself this arrangement, whatever it was becoming, did not require warmth or friendship, only tolerance, long enough for the pack to accept what the bond trial had confirmed. She told herself many things that week, and believed almost none of them. The estate itself seemed determined to remind her that she did not belong. She overheard servants murmuring about her lack of proper upbringing, when they thought she was out of earshot. She caught glimpses of nobles exchanging knowing looks whenever she entered a room, their conversations dying into polite silence the moment she came close enough to hear. Even the youngest members of the household staff, who might otherwise have been kind to her out of simple decency, seemed to have absorbed the general opinion that Elena Voss was an unwelcome complication rather than a future Luna. Priya Sinclair made her opinion known more directly. Elena encountered her on the 4th morning, in the estate's long gallery lined with portraits of past alphas and their mates, each painted face staring down with the same regal composure Elena felt certain she would never manage to imitate. Priya stood beneath a portrait of a woman who might have been Kellen's grandmother, her golden hair catching the morning light streaming through tall windows, her expression carefully arranged into something between pity and contempt. "You don't belong here," Priya said without preamble, before Elena had even fully entered the gallery. "I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's true, and someone should have the courage to tell you plainly, instead of whispering it behind your back. Elena considered walking away without responding, but something in her, some small, stubborn thread of pride that had survived years of being overlooked, made her stop instead. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said. "I didn't ask to be pulled into a bond, or announced in front of a hall full of strangers, or fitted for dresses I don't want. If you have complaints, they belong with Lady Serafina, not with me." Lady Serafina made a claim, Priya said, stepping closer, her voice tightening with barely restrained frustration. "You could have refused it. You could have insisted there was a mistake and walked away before any trial confirmed anything. Instead, you stayed." "I stayed because I wanted the truth," Elena said. "Not because I wanted your alliance, or your title, or anything you seem to think I'm trying to steal from you." Priya's composure cracked slightly, just enough for Elena to see the raw hurt beneath the anger. "My family built years of trust with the Blackthorns around this marriage," she said. "Kellen and I understood each other. We agreed to a partnership that made sense, that would have kept both our packs strong and secure. And now, because of some old ritual and a feeling his mother claims to have sensed, everything we built is being thrown away." Elena softened slightly, hearing the genuine pain in the other woman's voice, though it did nothing to change the reality of what the trial had confirmed. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it, even if Priya likely would not believe her. "I know this isn't fair to you, but I didn't create the bond, and I can't undo what it confirmed, no matter how much either of us might wish otherwise." "We'll see about that," Priya said, and turned sharply, her golden dress swirling around her as she walked away, leaving Elena alone beneath the watchful painted eyes of generations of Blackthorn alphas who had never once had to prove they belonged. That evening, Elena found herself wandering the estate's gardens after dinner, seeking quiet away from the watchful eyes of the household. The gardens were vast, filled with carefully tended flower beds and winding stone paths that led toward a small pond at the property's edge, and Elena had discovered over the past few days that this was one of the few places on the estate where she felt something close to peace. She did not expect to find Kellen there. He sat on a stone bench near the pond, his dark clothing making him nearly invisible in the fading light, his gaze fixed on the water, as though searching for answers in its calm surface. Elena hesitated at the edge of the path, uncertain whether to retreat quietly or announce her presence, but before she could decide, he spoke without turning. "You don't have to leave," he said. "The garden is large enough for both of us to avoid each other, if that's what you'd prefer." Elena approached slowly, settling onto the far end of the bench, leaving a careful distance between them. "I wasn't trying to avoid you," she said. "I just didn't expect anyone else to be out here." "I come here most evenings," Kellen admitted. "It's the only place in this entire estate where no one expects anything from me." Elena understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. "I heard about the Sinclair alliance," she said carefully. "Priya spoke to me this morning. She's angry." "She has reason to be," Kellen said, his voice quiet, but honest, in a way she had not heard from him before. "I made her a promise, even if it was never spoken as a formal declaration of love. I told her our marriage would secure both our packs, and I believed it. I built years of planning around that belief." "And now?" Elena asked. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze still fixed on the water. "Now I don't know what to believe," he said finally. "I felt something during the trial that I cannot explain and cannot ignore, no matter how much I might want to for the sake of the plans I had already made. My mother says it's fate. I've spent my entire life distrusting things I cannot control, and fate is the least controllable thing I can imagine." Elena studied his profile in the fading light, the tension in his jaw, the careful way he held himself even now, even alone, as though he had forgotten how to simply exist without the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "I understand not trusting things you can't control," she said. "A week ago I had a small life that made sense to me. Now I'm living in a house full of strangers who resent me, wearing dresses I didn't choose, waiting for a man I barely know to decide whether he wants me here at all." Kellen turned to look at her then, something shifting in his expression, softer than the guarded composure he usually wore. "I don't resent you," he said. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever else is true, none of this is your fault, and I haven't forgotten that you were dragged into it as unwillingly as I was." "That's something, I suppose," Elena said, offering a small, tired smile. "It's not nothing," Kellen agreed, And for a moment, something almost like understanding passed between them, quiet and fragile. Nothing like the dramatic pull of the bond trial, but something gentler, something that felt, strangely, like the beginning of trust. They sat together in comfortable silence, as darkness settled fully over the garden, the pond reflecting the first scattered stars, and Elena found herself, for the first time since the feast, not entirely certain she wanted to run from this life after all. The peace did not last. 3 days later, word reached the estate that a group of unfamiliar wolves had been spotted near the northern border of Blackthorn territory, moving with a purpose that suggested more than simple trespassing. Kellen left abruptly that morning, gathering a small group of warriors and departing, before Elena had even risen from bed, and the estate settled into a tense, watchful quiet that reminded everyone, Elena included, that behind the silk curtains and careful traditions, the pack's survival depended on strength she had not yet begun to understand. Lady Serafina found Elena in the garden later that afternoon, her expression more serious than Elena had seen it since the night of the feast. "The border sighting concerns me," the Queen Mother admitted, settling onto the same stone bench Elena had shared with Kellen days earlier. "It could be nothing, wolves from a neighboring territory wandering too close by accident, or it could be something else entirely. A message sent by someone unhappy with the news that has spread since the feast." "You think someone is testing the pack," Elena said slowly. "Because of me." "I think," Lady Serafina said carefully, "that a bond as strong as the one confirmed between you and my son does not stay quiet for long, and not everyone who hears of it will be pleased. Some may see it as weakness, others may see it as opportunity." Elena felt a chill settle over her despite the warm afternoon sun. She had not considered, until this moment, that her presence in this pack might invite danger beyond wounded pride and cold glares in the dining hall. The thought that entire packs might view the bond as a vulnerability worth exploiting settled heavily in her chest. And she found herself, for the first time, genuinely afraid of what she had stumbled into. "What happens if the sighting is more than nothing?" she asked quietly. Lady Serafina reached over and took Elena's hand, the same way she had that first morning after the feast, her grip warm and steady, despite the uncertainty in her voice. "Then we will face it together, as a pack," she said, "and you will learn, sooner than either of us would like, that being Luna means more than wearing fine dresses and learning which fork to use. It means standing beside this family when danger comes, not despite the bond, but because of it." Elena looked out over the quiet garden, the same peaceful place where she had begun, just days ago, to imagine a life she could belong to, and felt the weight of Lady Serafina's words settle over her like a mantle she had not asked to wear but could no longer refuse. Kellen did not return that evening, nor the next morning, and the silence from the northern border stretched Elena's nerves thinner with every passing hour. She tried to distract herself with the small tasks Lady Serafina assigned her, learning the names of the household staff, reviewing old ledgers that recorded the pack's history, anything to keep her mind from circling back to the image of Kellen, riding out at dawn, with only a handful of warriors beside him. On the second evening, a messenger arrived at the estate gates, breathless and pale, and within minutes, the entire household had gathered in the main hall to hear his report. Elena stood near the back of the crowd, her heart hammering as she strained to catch every word. The Northern Patrol had found more than trespassers. A small group of rogue wolves, unaffiliated with any recognized pack, had crossed onto Blackthorn land and attacked a border outpost, wounding 2 guards before Kellen's group arrived to drive them back. The messenger reported that Kellen himself had been injured in the fighting, though not gravely, and that he was being brought back to the estate for proper care. Elena did not remember deciding to move. She simply found herself pushing through the crowd toward the main doors, ignoring the surprised glances of nobles who clearly thought it improper for her to react so openly, driven by something urgent and instinctive that she did not stop to examine. Lady Serafina caught her arm gently at the threshold. "He will be all right," the Queen Mother said, though her own voice carried a thread of worry she could not quite hide. "But you should prepare yourself. Injuries from rogue attacks are rarely clean." Elena nodded, though the words did little to steady the frantic beat of her heart, and together they waited at the top of the estate's front steps, as the sound of approaching horses grew louder in the darkening evening. When Kellen was finally helped down from his horse, Elena's breath caught at the sight of him. His shirt was torn and stained dark along one side, his face pale beneath a layer of dust and dried blood, and though he tried to walk under his own strength, she could see the effort it cost him with every step. 2 warriors flanked him, ready to catch him if his legs gave out, and behind them, the rest of the small patrol looked similarly battered, though none as badly wounded as their alpha. Elena rushed forward before she could stop herself, reaching him just as his knees buckled slightly, and though she was hardly strong enough to bear his full weight, her presence seemed to steady him enough that he did not fall. "I'm fine," Kellen said, though his voice was rough with pain and exhaustion. "It looks worse than it is. You're covered in blood," Elena said, her voice tighter than she intended, fear sharpening every word. "That is not fine." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, at the raw concern in her tone, before exhaustion overtook whatever response he might have offered. The healers arrived quickly, and Elena stepped back to let them work, though she did not go far, hovering near the doorway of the room where Kellen was carried, unable to make herself leave despite Lady Seraphina's gentle suggestion that she rest. The wound, it turned out, was a deep gash along his ribs, painful but not life-threatening, the kind of injury that would heal fully within a few weeks with proper care. Elena did not fully relax until the head healer confirmed this, and even then, she found herself lingering outside Kellen's door, long after the household had settled for the night, unwilling to walk away, until she had seen with her own eyes that he was resting peacefully. It was well past midnight when the door opened, and one of the healers, a kind older man named Elias, found her still sitting in the hallway chair, her eyes heavy but stubbornly open. "He's asking for you," Elias said, an odd note of curiosity in his voice, as though he had not expected this particular request. Elena entered quietly, finding Kellen propped against a stack of pillows, his ribs freshly bandaged, his face pale, but far more alert than she had feared it would be. He watched her cross the room, with an expression she could not quite name, something between gratitude and confusion. "You didn't have to wait out there all night," he said. "I know," Elena replied, settling into the chair beside his bed. "I couldn't make myself leave." "Why not?" he asked, and the question seemed genuine rather than rhetorical, as though he truly did not understand why anyone would concern themselves so deeply with his well-being. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "Because when the messenger said you were hurt, I felt it like something breaking inside my own chest," she admitted. "I don't fully understand what that means yet, but I couldn't pretend it wasn't true." Kellen was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face, as though looking for something he had not expected to find. "The bond," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I felt something similar. Even wounded, even exhausted, some part of me was aware of exactly how far I was from this estate, from you, the entire ride back." "Is that normal?" Elena asked. "For a bond, I mean." "I don't know," Kellen admitted. "I've never had one before. I only know what my mother has told me, and even she has never experienced it herself, only sensed it in others." Elena reached out, hesitant at first, and gently rested her hand over his where it lay against the blanket. He did not pull away. Instead, his fingers curled slightly around hers, careful and warm, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, simply sitting together in the quiet room, while the candle burned low beside the bed. "The rogue wolves who attacked," Elena said eventually, breaking the silence. "Do you know who sent them?" Kellen's expression darkened slightly. "Not yet. They carried no markings, no signs of pack allegiance, which suggests they were paid rather than acting under their own banner. Someone wanted to send a message or test our defenses, and I intend to find out who before they try again." "Do you think it's connected to the bond?" Elena asked, echoing the fear Lady Seraphina had voiced days earlier. "To me?" "I don't know," Kellen admitted honestly, "but the timing is difficult to ignore. Whoever ordered this attack chose to act less than a week after my mother's announcement, and that is not the kind of coincidence I am willing to dismiss without investigation." Elena felt the familiar chill of fear settle over her again, the same fear Lady Seraphina's warning had planted days before, now confirmed by the very real evidence of Kellen's wound and the empty uncertainty of who had ordered the attack. But beneath the fear, something else had begun to grow as well, quiet and unexpected, a sense of belonging she had not anticipated finding in this grand, unfamiliar house full of strangers. "Whatever this is," she said softly, "whoever is behind it, I don't want to run from it anymore. A week ago I would have. I would have found the first excuse to leave and gone back to my quiet life without looking back. But I don't want to do that now. Kellen's fingers tightened gently around hers. I'm glad, he said, his voice rough with something that sounded almost like relief. Because I find, against every plan I had carefully built for my life, that I don't want you to leave either. Outside the window, the moon hung low over the quiet estate grounds, and somewhere beyond the walls, in territory still unmapped and unknown, whoever had sent the rogue wolves waited, patient and unseen, for their next opportunity to strike. Kellen's recovery took 2 weeks, and during that time Elena found herself drawn into the daily rhythms of managing the estate in ways she had never expected. Lady Serafina, perhaps sensing that idle hands would only feed Elena's anxiety, began teaching her the practical responsibilities of a Luna, from settling minor disputes among the household staff, to understanding the ledgers that tracked the pack's resources and alliances. Elena discovered, somewhat to her own surprise, that she had a talent for it, a patience with details and people that the noble-born women around her often lacked. Not everyone welcomed her efforts. She noticed it first in small things. A missing ledger she had left on her desk, only to find it days later shoved carelessly behind a shelf. A servant who had been kind to her suddenly reassigned to duties in a distant wing of the estate, replaced by someone colder and less forthcoming. Invitations to small gatherings among the pack's noble families that somehow never reached her, though she later learned they had been sent and simply lost along the way. She mentioned none of it to Kellen at first, unwilling to burden him while he was still healing, but Lady Serafina noticed the pattern before Elena said a word. Someone is testing your patience, the Queen Mother observed one afternoon, as they reviewed a stack of correspondence together in the estate's study. Small inconveniences, nothing large enough to accuse directly, but persistent enough to wear you down. I hadn't wanted to make it into something bigger than it is, Elena admitted. It is already something, Lady Serafina said firmly. Those who resent your place here are counting on your reluctance to speak up. They believe if they make your life difficult enough, quietly enough, you will eventually decide the trouble isn't worth it and leave on your own, sparing them the difficulty of forcing you out directly. Elena's jaw tightened at the thought. Do you think it's Priya? I think Priya is grieving a future she believed was certain, Lady Serafina said carefully. Whether her grief has curdled into something more deliberate, I cannot say for certain. But you would be wise to keep your guard up regardless of who is responsible. Elena took the warning seriously, though she found it difficult to know how to defend herself against inconveniences too small to confront directly. She began keeping careful records of her own, noting which documents went missing and when, which servants seemed to avoid her without explanation, small patterns that might eventually reveal a larger picture. The opportunity to prove her place in the household came sooner than she expected. A dispute arose among two of the estate's oldest families over a boundary line dividing their farmland, a disagreement that had simmered for years without resolution and threatened now to boil over into something the pack could not afford during a time of uncertain border security. Kellen, still recovering and unable to travel easily, asked Elena to attend the mediation in his place, a request that startled several members of the council who had gathered to advise him. She has no experience with pack law, one counselor objected, a stern older man named Vance, who had never bothered to hide his skepticism of Elena's place in the household. This dispute requires careful judgment, not sentiment. She has spent the past 2 weeks studying pack law more thoroughly than most nobles born into this household ever bothered to, Kellen replied, his voice leaving no room for further argument. I trust her judgment, and if this pack intends to accept her as Luna, it will need to trust it as well. Elena felt a flush of gratitude and nervousness in equal measure as she prepared for the mediation, poring over old boundary records late into the night to ensure she understood every detail of the dispute before facing the two families the next morning. When the day arrived, she found herself seated at the head of a long table in the estate's council chamber, facing two sets of hostile, doubtful eyes, with Vance watching from the corner of the room, as though waiting for her to fail. She did not fail. Drawing on the records she had studied and the patient, careful listening skills she had honed over years of being overlooked and underestimated, Elena guided the two families through their grievances, identifying an old surveying error that had caused the confusion in the first place. and proposing a fair redistribution of the disputed land that satisfied both sides without favoring either. By the time the meeting ended, both families had agreed to her proposal, and even Vance's skeptical expression had shifted into something closer to grudging respect. Word of her success spread quickly through the estate, and though it did not erase the whispers or the lingering resentment among those determined to see her fail, it planted the first seeds of genuine respect among members of the household who had previously dismissed her entirely. Kellen found her in the garden that evening, still healing but strong enough now to walk without assistance, and settled onto their familiar bench beside the pond with a small, genuine smile that Elena had rarely seen from him. "Vance has not stopped talking about the mediation," he said. "For a man who spent an hour before the meeting insisting you were unqualified, he seems remarkably impressed now." "I was terrified the entire time," Elena admitted, smiling despite herself. "I kept waiting for someone to point out that I had no right to be sitting at that table." "No one did, because you belonged there," Kellen said. "You handled it better than most seasoned counselors would have." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, though she quickly reminded herself not to read too much into simple praise. "I've been keeping notes," she said, changing the subject before her feelings became too obvious, "about small things that have gone wrong since I arrived. Missing documents, servants reassigned without explanation, invitations that never reached me." Kellen's expression sobered immediately. "Show me." Elena retrieved the small notebook she had been keeping and walked him through the pattern she had noticed, careful to present only facts rather than accusations. Kellen listened without interruption, his jaw tightening more with each entry, until finally he closed the notebook and handed it back to her with a grim expression. "This ends now," he said. "I'll speak with the household staff directly and make it clear that interference with your responsibilities will not be tolerated, regardless of who is behind it." "I don't want to cause more trouble than necessary," Elena said, though she appreciated the fierce protectiveness in his tone, more than she wanted to admit. "You're not causing trouble," Kellen said firmly. "Someone is trying to undermine you, quietly enough to avoid direct blame, and I won't allow that to continue, simply because confronting it might be uncomfortable for a few nobles who preferred things the way they were before you arrived." Elena studied his face in the fading evening light, struck again by how different he seemed here in the garden, away from the formal weight of his position, than he had seemed that first night at the feast. The cold, unreadable alpha who had greeted his guests with careful nods had slowly given way, over these past weeks, to someone warmer, someone who listened carefully and defended fiercely, someone she found herself trusting more with each passing day. "Thank you," she said softly. "You don't need to thank me for defending what's right," Kellen replied, though something in his eyes softened at her words nonetheless. "But you're welcome, regardless." They sat together as darkness settled fully over the garden, and Elena found herself, once again, grateful for the quiet peace of this small corner of the estate, and for the man beside her who had begun, slowly and against both their expectations, to feel less like a stranger and more like someone she genuinely wanted beside her. Kellen kept his word. Within days, the small acts of sabotage stopped entirely, and Elena noticed a shift in how the household staff treated her, not universal warmth, but a wary respect that had not existed before. The nobles who had whispered behind their hands during the feast still watched her carefully, still measured her every word and gesture, but the outright hostility softened into something more like cautious observation, as though the entire estate had decided to wait and see, rather than dismiss her outright. It was during this fragile, uncertain peace that Elena and Kellen began spending more time together, not out of obligation, but out of something that had grown quietly between them over the weeks since the bond trial. They took to walking the estate grounds together in the early evenings, discussing everything from pack history to Elena's childhood memories of the small cottage where she had grown up, and Elena found herself, more often than she expected, laughing at something Kellen said, a low, genuine laugh that surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. "You laugh more than you did during our first weeks together," Kellen observed one evening, as they walked along the edge of the estate's orchard, the trees heavy with early summer fruit. "You smile more too," Elena pointed out. "I don't think I saw you smile at all during the feast." "I had little reason to smile that night," he admitted. "I was watching years of careful planning unravel in front of an entire hall of witnesses." And now? Elena asked, glancing at him sideways. Kellen considered the question seriously, as he seemed to consider most things, weighing his words before speaking. Now I find myself looking forward to these walks more than I would have expected, he said finally. I find myself thinking about you when we're apart, wondering how the mediation with the border families went, or whether you managed to finish the book you mentioned last week. I did not expect any of this, Elena, and I am still adjusting to how thoroughly it has changed my expectations for my own life. Elena's heart quickened at his words, warmth spreading through her chest, in a way that had become familiar over these past weeks, though no less overwhelming each time it happened. I feel the same, she admitted quietly. I came to this estate terrified, and certain I didn't belong. And somehow, without fully understanding how, I've started to feel like maybe I do. Kellen stopped walking, and turned to face her fully, his expression more open than she had ever seen it, stripped of the careful control he usually maintained, even during their private conversations. You belong here, he said, his voice low and certain. Not because of the bond, though I no longer doubt that either. You belong here because of who you are, the way you handled the border dispute, the patience you've shown even when this household has been unkind to you, the courage you had to sit outside my door all night after the attack, rather than retreating to somewhere safer and more comfortable. Elena felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his words. I didn't think you noticed any of that, she said softly. I notice everything about you, Kellen said, reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek longer than necessary. I have from the very first moment I saw you across that hall, even before my mother said a word. I told myself it was simply surprise, at an unfamiliar face among the guests. I know now that it was something far more significant, something I was too stubborn and too guarded to recognize for what it was. The space between them had narrowed without Elena fully realizing it, and she found herself acutely aware of his closeness, the warmth radiating from him, the steady, careful way he watched her as though waiting for permission she had not yet realized she wanted to give. Kellen, she said softly, unsure what she meant to say next, only certain that she did not want this moment to end. He seemed to understand anyway. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished, he closed the remaining distance between them and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, warm and careful, and full of a tenderness that made Elena's breath catch in her chest. It was not the dramatic, overwhelming pull of the bond trial, but something quieter and somehow more meaningful, a choice made freely, rather than a connection forced by fate. I don't want to rush you, he said softly, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes. The bond gave us no choice in finding each other, but everything beyond that, I want it to be something we choose, not something we simply accept because fate decided it for us. I want that too, Elena said, smiling up at him with a warmth she no longer bothered to hide. I want to choose this, choose you, not because of some old ritual, or a feeling your mother sensed across a crowded hall, but because of who you actually are, once you stop hiding behind duty and titles. Kellen laughed then, a genuine, unguarded sound that Elena had come to treasure more than she expected, and for a moment, standing together in the quiet orchard, as the sun set behind the distant hills, the weight of politics, and suspicious nobles, and unresolved threats along the border, felt distant, unimportant, easily set aside in favor of the simple, growing certainty that whatever challenges still waited for them, they would face them together. It was a peace that would not last much longer, though neither of them knew it yet, standing there among the fruit trees with the last light of evening settling gently around them. The peace lasted exactly 9 days. It ended on a quiet afternoon, when Lady Serafina summoned Elena to a private study Elena had never been permitted to enter before, a small room tucked away in the oldest section of the estate, its shelves lined with books far older than any Elena had seen elsewhere in the household. The Queen Mother sat behind a heavy wooden desk, her expression graver than Elena had ever seen it, and gestured for Elena to sit in the chair across from her. I have kept something from you, Lady Serafina said without preamble, once the door had closed behind them. Something I should have told you the night of the feast, but feared would overwhelm you before you had even begun to accept the bond itself. Elena's stomach tightened with unease. What is it? Lady Serafina reached into a drawer and withdrew an old, worn journal, its leather cover cracked with age, and set it gently on the desk between them. "This belonged to my grandmother," she said. She was known among the old packs as a woman with rare gifts, an ability to sense not only bonds but bloodlines, connections between families that had been broken or hidden generations ago. Before she passed, she wrote of a prophecy involving a lost bloodline, one tied to an ancient pack that vanished from the old records nearly 100 years ago. "I don't understand what this has to do with me," Elena said carefully, though a cold, uneasy feeling had already begun settling in her chest. "When I sensed the bond between you and Kellen that first night," Lady Serafina continued, "I sensed something else as well, something I did not mention because I could not yet be certain of it. A trace of that lost bloodline, buried deep within you, likely inherited from an ancestor whose name was scrubbed from history generations ago." Elena's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was being told. "My parents never spoke of any special lineage," she said slowly. "We were ordinary people. My mother worked as a seamstress. My father tended crops on borrowed land. There was nothing extraordinary about us." "Bloodlines can hide for generations, dormant, until circumstances awaken them," Lady Serafina said gently. "Your ordinary upbringing does not disprove what I sensed, Elena. It may simply mean your ancestors chose, wisely or out of necessity, to hide what they carried." "Why would anyone need to hide it?" Elena asked, though some instinctive part of her already dreaded the answer. Lady Serafina's expression grew somber. "The pack this bloodline is tied to did not simply vanish by accident," she said. "According to my grandmother's journal, they were hunted, deliberately and systematically, by rivals who feared the power their bloodline carried, a rare strength tied closely to the kind of true bonds we confirmed between you and my son. If word spreads that this bloodline has resurfaced within you, it may explain the rogue attack on our northern border far better than simple political jealousy ever could." Elena felt the room tilt slightly around her, the weight of this revelation settling over her shoulders like a physical burden. "You think someone attacked the border because of me," she said slowly, "because of some bloodline I didn't even know I carried." "I think it's possible," Lady Serafina said carefully. "I cannot be certain until we investigate further, but the timing, combined with what I sensed in you that first night, makes it a possibility I cannot responsibly ignore." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Elena asked, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and frustration. "Why let me believe the attack might simply have been political jealousy over the Sinclair alliance when you suspected something far more dangerous?" "Because I did not want to burden you with a threat I could not yet confirm," Lady Serafina admitted. "I have spent these past weeks quietly researching my grandmother's journal, cross-referencing old pack records, trying to determine whether my suspicion holds any merit, before frightening you with a possibility that might ultimately prove false." "And now?" Elena asked. "Have you confirmed it?" Lady Serafina hesitated, then reached into the same drawer and withdrew a second document, a faded map marked with symbols Elena did not recognize. "Not entirely," she admitted, "but I have found enough to believe the danger is real, and growing. Whoever ordered the attack on our border likely suspects, as I do, that the lost bloodline has resurfaced. If they act on that suspicion before we understand fully what we're facing, the consequences could be far more severe than a single skirmish at the border." Elena sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the weight of everything she had just learned. A week ago, her greatest concern had been learning which fork to use at dinner, and enduring whispered insults from unkind nobles. Now she was being told that some hidden inheritance in her blood might have made her, and by extension, the entire Blackthorn pack, a target for forces far more dangerous than jealous rivals or wounded pride. "Does Kellen know?" she asked finally. "Not yet," Lady Serafina said. "I wanted to speak with you first, to give you the choice of how and when this information reaches him. But I would urge you not to keep it from him for long, Elena. If danger is coming, he will need to understand fully what we're facing in order to protect this pack, and you, properly." Elena nodded slowly, though her mind still reeled with questions she did not yet have answers to. "I need time to think," she admitted. "This is a lot to accept all at once." "Take whatever time you need," Lady Serafina said gently, reaching across the desk to take Elena's hand, the same steady, warm gesture she had offered that first morning after the feast. "But know that whatever this bloodline means, whatever danger it brings, you are not facing it alone. This family will stand beside you, exactly as we promised the night the bond was confirmed. Elena left the study with her mind spinning, the weight of this new revelation settling heavily over the fragile peace she had only just begun to build within these estate walls. She found herself walking without direction, eventually ending up once again at the small pond in the garden, staring at her own reflection in the still water, as though searching for some hidden truth in her own face, some sign of the ancient bloodline Lady Seraphina claimed she carried. She did not know how long she sat there before Kellen found her, drawn perhaps by some instinct tied to the bond they shared, settling quietly beside her, without immediately asking what troubled her. "My mother spoke with you," he said eventually, when Elena remained silent for several long minutes. "I could feel something had shifted, even before I saw your face." Elena looked up at him, torn between the instinct to protect him from a danger she did not yet fully understand, and the growing trust she had built with him over these past weeks, a trust that told her honesty mattered more than protection right now. "There's something you need to know," she said quietly, and began, haltingly at first, to explain everything Lady Seraphina had told her, watching Kellen's expression shift from confusion to concern to something fiercer, something protective, as the full weight of the revelation settled between them. News of the ancient bloodline remained carefully guarded within the estate walls, known only to Kellen, Lady Seraphina, and a small handful of trusted advisors, including the healer Elias and the stern counselor Vance, who had grudgingly become one of Elena's quiet supporters since the border mediation. Kellen doubled the guard along the northern border and quietly reached out to allied packs, seeking any information about unfamiliar wolves moving through the region, all while trying to maintain the appearance of ordinary pack business to avoid alarming the wider household. It was not enough to prevent the next blow from landing, though it came from a direction none of them expected. Elena noticed Priya watching her with unusual intensity during a small gathering held in the estate's music room, an evening meant to celebrate the completion of a trade agreement with a neighboring territory. Priya had attended more of these gatherings since the feast than Elena would have expected, given her clear resentment, and Elena had assumed it was simply pride, a refusal to be seen retreating from pack society, despite her personal disappointment. She realized, too late, that pride was not Priya's only motivation. 2 days after the gathering, a rumor began spreading through the estate with startling speed, whispered first among the household staff and then, inevitably, reaching the ears of visiting nobles from neighboring packs. The rumor claimed that Elena's bond with Kellen was not the rare, true bond Lady Seraphina had announced, but a manipulation, a claim fabricated by the Queen Mother herself to secure a political advantage for reasons no one could quite agree upon, ranging from senility to deliberate scheming against the Sinclair alliance. Worse, the rumor suggested that Elena had somehow influenced the bond trial itself, using herbs or trickery to fake the pulse Mira had witnessed, painting her not as an innocent, unwilling participant in fate's decision, but as a calculating outsider who had schemed her way into a position of power she had no right to claim. Elena learned of the rumor from a pale, shaken Marisol, who arrived at the estate gates unannounced, having heard whispers of the accusation, reaching even the distant edges of pack territory where she still lived. "They're saying you tricked your way into this," Marisol said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and outrage, as Elena led her into a private sitting room. "That the entire bond was staged. That you used some kind of deception to secure the Alpha's attention." "That's absurd," Elena said, though a cold knot of fear had already begun forming in her stomach. "Anyone who witnessed the bond trial knows that isn't true." "Rumors don't need to be true to cause damage," Marisol said grimly. "They only need to spread far enough, fast enough, before anyone can properly contradict them." Elena brought the rumor to Kellen and Lady Seraphina that evening, and watched Kellen's expression darken, with a fury she had not seen from him since the night of the northern border attack. "This did not spread on its own," he said, pacing the length of the study with barely contained anger. "Someone deliberately planted this rumor, and I intend to find out who." "I have my suspicions," Lady Seraphina said quietly, "though suspicion alone will not be enough to satisfy the council, or the neighboring packs now questioning the legitimacy of the bond." Elena felt the familiar weight of dread settling over her shoulders, the same feeling she had experienced that first night at the feast, when hundreds of eyes had turned toward her all at once, judging and dismissing her before she had spoken a single word in her own defense. What happens if the rumor isn't contained? She asked quietly. It will erode trust in this household, Kellen said grimly. Among our own people, and among allied packs who may begin to question whether an alliance with a pack led by an alpha, whose bond is publicly doubted, remains worth the risk. Combined with the threat along our northern border, this could not have come at a more dangerous time. The investigation that followed moved carefully, quietly, led by Vance, who Elena had come to realize possessed a sharp, methodical mind, well suited to uncovering deception, despite his initial skepticism of her. Within days, he traced the origin of the rumor to a servant recently hired within the household, a young woman named Corinne, who had joined the staff only weeks before the feast, under recommendation from a household connected distantly to the Sinclair family. Confronted privately by Vance and Kellen, Corinne eventually confessed, her voice shaking with fear, that she had been paid handsomely to spread the rumor throughout the household and, through careful placement of the story among visiting servants, ensure it reached the ears of neighboring packs as well. She refused, even under pressure, to name who had paid her directly, though the connection to the Sinclair household made the source difficult to mistake. Kellen confronted Priya himself, in a private meeting Elena was not present for, but heard about afterward, from Lady Serafina, who had insisted on attending to witness the exchange. Priya denied any direct involvement, insisting the servant had acted on her own initiative, or perhaps at the direction of someone within her extended family without her knowledge, but the denial rang hollow, unconvincing even to those inclined to give her the benefit of doubt. I cannot prove her direct involvement, Kellen told Elena that evening, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. Corinne refuses to name her directly, and without that confirmation, formally accusing the daughter of an allied pack's alpha risks, igniting a conflict we cannot currently afford, not with the northern border already unsettled. So she simply gets away with it, Elena said, frustration coloring her voice, despite her efforts to remain calm. For now, Kellen said grimly, but I will not forget this, and neither will my mother. Priya has made her choice clear, whatever plausible deniability she has constructed around it. The rumor was eventually contained, though not without lasting damage. Vance arranged for a public statement, carefully worded and witnessed by several respected elders from neighboring packs, confirming the legitimacy of the bond trial, and formally discrediting the false claims that had spread through the household. It quieted the worst of the whispers, though Elena noticed lingering doubt in the eyes of some visiting nobles, seeds of suspicion that would take considerably longer to fully uproot. More troubling than the rumor itself was what it revealed about the danger still surrounding them. If Priya's family was willing to spread deliberate lies to undermine the bond, weakening the pack's stability, at precisely the moment ancient enemies might be circling in search of the resurfaced bloodline, then the threats facing Elena and the Blackthorn pack were far from over, and far more coordinated than a single rogue attack along a distant border. We need to move faster, Lady Serafina said during a private meeting held late that night, her expression graver than Elena had seen it since their first conversation about the bloodline. Whoever is truly behind the border attack may be watching closely, waiting to see whether internal division within our pack creates an opportunity they can exploit. We cannot afford further delay in understanding exactly what we're facing. Elena, sitting beside Kellen with his hand resting protectively over hers, felt the fragile peace of these past weeks slipping further away, replaced by a growing certainty that whatever storm was building around them, it would arrive far sooner than any of them were fully prepared for. The storm arrived 8 days later, in the form of a formal gathering the Sinclair family had requested, ostensibly to discuss renewed terms for a trade agreement between their territories, but which everyone within the Blackthorn estate understood to be something far more significant. Lady Serafina had received word that Priya's father intended to raise, publicly and formally before the assembled council, the question of whether the bond between Elena and Kellen should be considered binding at all, given the unresolved rumors and the political instability they had caused. He means to force a decision, Kellen said grimly, as he and Elena reviewed the formal request together in his study, the evening before the gathering. If I refuse to address the matter publicly, he will claim I am hiding something. If I address it and reaffirm the bond, he will use it as justification to formally withdraw from any future cooperation between our packs, painting the Sinclair family as the wronged party throughout. What do you want to do? Elena asked quietly. Kellen looked at her for a long moment, something resolute settling into his expression, a certainty she had not seen from him even during their quietest, most honest conversations in the garden. "I want to make my choice clear," he said. "Not because a council forces my hand, but because I have known for weeks now exactly where my loyalty belongs, and I am tired of allowing politics to dictate a decision my heart made a long time ago." Elena's breath caught at the quiet conviction in his voice. "Are you certain?" she asked. "This will mean formally severing whatever remains of the Sinclair alliance. It may mean conflict with a pack that has been allied with yours for generations." "I am certain," Kellen said, reaching for her hand with a gentleness that had become familiar and precious to her over these past weeks. "I was certain the night of the bond trial, though I was too stubborn to admit it fully, even to myself. I have only grown more certain with every day since, watching you handle every challenge this household has thrown at you, with more grace and courage than most nobles born into this life could manage." The gathering the next morning was tense from the moment the first guests arrived, the great hall arranged much as it had been the night of the feast, though the atmosphere carried none of the celebration of that earlier evening. Priya's father, Alpha Bastian Sinclair, arrived with a small retinue of advisors, his expression carefully neutral, though Elena could sense the calculated tension beneath his composed exterior. Priya herself sat near her father, her golden dress replaced today by a more severe deep green, her expression unreadable, in a way that unsettled Elena more than open hostility would have. The council convened formally, and Bastian Sinclair rose first, his voice carrying easily through the hushed hall, as he laid out his concerns with careful, deliberate phrasing, designed to sound reasonable, rather than accusatory. He spoke of the rumors that had spread, of the uncertainty they had caused among allied packs, of the years of trust built between the Sinclair and Blackthorn families that now hung precariously in the balance. "I do not ask the Alpha to abandon whatever bond he believes he has found," Bastian said, his tone carefully measured. "I ask only that he consider the wisdom of formalizing an alliance, built on decades of trust and mutual benefit, alongside whatever personal connection he has discovered, rather than discarding one entirely in favor of the other." Kellen rose slowly from his seat at the head of the hall, and Elena felt her heart pound as every eye in the room turned toward him, waiting for his response. "I have spent the past weeks considering exactly this question," Kellen said, his voice steady and clear, carrying easily to every corner of the hall. "I have weighed the value of political alliance against the truth the bond trial confirmed, beyond any reasonable doubt, and I have come to a decision I intend to state plainly, without further delay or ambiguity." He turned, his gaze finding Elena where she sat, near the front of the hall, and something in his expression softened, despite the formal weight of the moment. "The bond between myself and Elena Voss is true," Kellen continued, his voice growing firmer with each word. "It was confirmed through ancient ritual, witnessed by my mother, and by Mira, whose judgment in these matters no member of this council has ever previously questioned. I will not set aside a true bond, confirmed beyond doubt, in favor of an arrangement built on political convenience, regardless of the years of history behind it." A murmur swept through the hall, and Bastian Sinclair's careful composure cracked slightly, color rising in his weathered face. "You would risk generations of alliance for an unproven girl with no lineage, no standing among the packs?" "She has more lineage than you currently know," Kellen said, and Elena felt her pulse quicken at the deliberate weight in his words, though he stopped short of revealing the full truth of the ancient bloodline before this hostile audience. "And she has proven, time and again over these past weeks, that she possesses more wisdom and courage than most who were born into standing ever bother to demonstrate. I will not apologize for choosing the bond fate confirmed over an arrangement built on convenience." Priya rose abruptly from her seat, her composure finally breaking entirely. "This is madness," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and something rawer beneath it. "You would destroy everything our families built, everything I believed we understood between us, for a bond you did not even want a month ago." Kellen's expression softened slightly as he looked at her, genuine regret evident beneath his resolve. "I never meant to cause you pain, Priya," he said quietly. "I believed, for years, that our arrangement made sense, and I am sorry for the hurt this decision causes you. But I cannot build my life, or the future of this pack, around a partnership my heart was never truly tied to, not when fate has shown me something real." Bastian Sinclair's jaw tightened, fury barely restrained beneath his diplomatic exterior. "Then consider our alliance formally withdrawn," he said coldly. "And consider carefully, Alpha Blackthorn, whether you have made a wise choice today, or whether pride and fate together have led you to a decision you will come to regret." He turned and left the hall without further ceremony, Priya following closely behind, though she cast one last look back at Elena before the doors closed behind her, an expression Elena could not fully interpret, somewhere between anger and something that looked almost like reluctant understanding. The hall remained tense in their absence, the assembled nobles exchanging uncertain glances, uncertain how to react to the formal collapse of an alliance that had shaped pack politics for generations. Lady Seraphina rose then, her presence commanding immediate attention despite her quiet demeanor. "My son has made his choice, and I stand behind it fully," she said, her voice carrying the same steady authority Elena remembered from that first night at the feast. "The bond confirmed between Kellen and Elena is not a matter of convenience or political calculation. It is truth, witnessed and verified, according to the oldest traditions of our people. I ask this council to honor that truth, as our traditions demand, and to trust that this decision, however difficult, serves the true strength of this pack far better than any arrangement built on convenience alone." Vance rose next, surprising Elena with the firmness of his support. "I have watched Elena Voss handle challenges this past month that would have overwhelmed nobles born into far greater privilege," he said. "I opposed her presence in this household when she first arrived. I no longer do. If the bond has chosen her, this council would be wise to accept that choice, rather than cling to an alliance already broken by its own withdrawal." Slowly, gradually, other members of the council added their voices, some out of genuine conviction, others perhaps simply recognizing which direction the wind now blew, until the hall's earlier tension gave way to something closer to cautious acceptance. Elena sat quietly through it all, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment, watching Kellen stand firm before his council and his people, defending a bond and a life together that neither of them had asked for, but had come, gradually and honestly, to choose freely. When the gathering finally ended and the hall began to empty, Kellen crossed directly to where Elena sat, kneeling briefly beside her chair, his expression open and unguarded in a way she had rarely seen him allow in public. "I meant every word," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Whatever comes next, whatever danger still waits for us, I choose this. I choose you." Elena felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes, warmth spreading through her chest, despite the uncertainty still hanging over their future. "I choose you too," she said softly. "Sinclair alliance or not, ancient bloodline or not, I choose this life, and I choose you." The weeks following the council gathering brought their own difficulties, though none struck with the sudden violence of the northern border attack. Bastian Sinclair withdrew his pack's cooperation formally, and for a tense stretch of days, Kellen's advisors worried openly about retaliation, about whether wounded pride might push the Sinclair family toward more active hostility. But Bastian, whatever his anger, proved unwilling to risk open conflict over a broken marriage arrangement, and the Sinclair withdrawal settled instead into a cold, distant silence, painful, but not immediately dangerous. The greater threat, as Lady Seraphina had feared, came from elsewhere. It was Mira, the old elder who had guided the bond trial, who finally uncovered the true source of the northern attack, after weeks of careful research into old pack records and quiet correspondence with elders from distant territories who remembered stories passed down from their own grandparents. The rogue wolves who had struck the border, she discovered, had been hired by a splinter group, descended from the very pack that had hunted Elena's ancient bloodline, generations earlier, a group that had never fully abandoned its old fears, quietly watching for any sign that the bloodline they believed extinct might resurface. "They call themselves the Ashfall Remnant," Mira explained, during a private meeting attended by Kellen, Lady Seraphina, Vance, and Elena herself. Scattered, weakened, compared to what they once were, but still driven by the old belief that bloodlines like yours pose a threat to the natural order of pack hierarchy. When word of the bond announcement reached them, likely through informants among the wider pack network, they moved to test your defenses and gauge how seriously the Blackthorn pack would defend its claim. "Are they likely to strike again?" Kellen asked, his expression grim. "Possibly," Mira admitted. "Though the failure of their first attempt, combined with the strength you demonstrated afterward, may give them pause. Groups like the Ashfall Remnant thrive on opportunity and weakness. A pack that stands united, with its Luna publicly and firmly claimed, offers them far less opportunity than one fractured by doubt and division. Elena thought of the council gathering, of Kellen's firm declaration before the assembled nobles, and understood, with a chill, how much more vulnerable they might have remained if he had chosen differently, if political convenience had won out over the truth of the bond. "What do we do now?" Elena asked. "We strengthen what we have built," Lady Seraphina said firmly. "We reinforce the northern border. We quietly reach out to allied packs who may share old records about the Ashfall Remnant, and we make certain, beyond any possible doubt, that this pack, and its Luna, cannot be shaken by threats from the shadows." The following weeks passed with careful, steady effort. Kellen strengthened the border patrols and forged new agreements with smaller neighboring territories, eager to fill the gap left by the Sinclair withdrawal. Territories who, Elena noted with quiet satisfaction, seemed genuinely impressed by the strength and conviction the Blackthorn pack had shown throughout the entire ordeal. Vance proved instrumental in these negotiations, his sharp mind and newfound respect for Elena serving the pack well in council after council. Elena herself grew more confident with each passing week, no longer the frightened, overlooked girl who had hidden in the shadows of the feast hall, but a woman who had earned her place through patience, courage, and quiet determination. She continued studying pack law and history, deepening her understanding of the traditions she had once known nothing about, and found, to her own surprise, that she had come to genuinely love this life, complicated and demanding as it was. No further attacks came from the Ashfall Remnant, though Mira cautioned that their silence did not guarantee safety forever, only that the pack's demonstrated strength had, for now, discouraged further open aggression. Elena understood that some vigilance would always remain necessary, that the ancient bloodline she carried would likely never fully fade from the concerns of those who feared it. But she no longer faced that reality with fear alone. She faced it, now, with the steady support of a pack that had chosen, gradually and genuinely, to stand behind her. 3 months after the night of the feast that had upended her entire life, the Blackthorn estate prepared once more for a grand celebration. This time not a founding feast honoring old traditions, but a formal gathering to celebrate Elena's confirmation as Luna, a title she now carried, not as an accident of fate alone, but as something earned through months of quiet strength and genuine devotion to the pack she had once believed would never accept her. The great hall glowed once more with 100 candles, the long table stretching the same impressive length it had that first overwhelming night, but everything else felt profoundly different. Elena did not sit alone in a shadowed corner this time. She sat beside Kellen at the head of the table, dressed not in a borrowed plain dress but in a gown chosen carefully to reflect her own taste, simple but elegant, a deep forest green that Kellen had told her, with quiet sincerity, reminded him of the garden where they had first begun to truly know each other. Lady Seraphina rose once more before the assembled hall, her silver hair still pinned in its elegant crown, her expression carrying the same quiet pride Elena remembered from that very first announcement, though warmer now, softened by months of watching Elena grow into the role fate had chosen for her. 3 months ago, I stood before this hall and spoke words that many of you doubted, that some of you resented, and that a few of you actively worked to undermine, Lady Seraphina said, her voice carrying easily through the hushed hall. Tonight, I stand before you again, not to announce a bond, but to celebrate one, fully proven not only by ancient ritual, but by the strength, wisdom, and courage this young woman has demonstrated in every challenge placed before her since. She turned to face Elena directly, her expression warm with genuine affection. Elena Voss came to us as a stranger, uncertain of her place, doubted by many who should have welcomed her from the start. She leaves that uncertainty behind tonight, fully and rightfully claimed as Luna of the Blackthorn pack, bonded not only by fate, but by her own choice, and by the choice of the Alpha who stands beside her. The hall erupted into applause, genuine this time, free of the whispered doubts and hostile glances that had marked Elena's first night among them. Vance, seated near the front of the hall, offered her a small, respectful nod that meant more to Elena than she could easily express. Even some of the nobles who had once mocked her plain dress and simple manners now watched her with something closer to admiration. Kellen rose beside her, taking her hand gently in front of the entire assembled hall, his expression open and unguarded, free of the cold, careful composure he had worn that first night. "I did not choose this bond," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "but I have chosen, every day since, to honor it, and to honor the woman fate placed before me. Elena has taught me that strength is not always found in careful political calculation, but sometimes in simple, stubborn courage, and in the willingness to choose what is true, even when it is difficult." Elena felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the warmth of the moment, by how far she had come from that frightened girl who had sat alone at the edge of the feast table, certain she did not belong. She thought of Marisol, seated now among the honored guests rather than watching from a distance, of Mira's quiet wisdom, of Vance's grudging respect turned genuine support, of Lady Seraphina's steady guidance through every difficult step of this journey. Most of all, she thought of Kellen, of the man who had stood before his entire council and chosen truth over convenience, who had defended her fiercely against rumors and sabotage, who had learned, alongside her, that fate might bring two people together, but it was the choices made afterward, the patience and honesty and quiet daily courage, that truly built a bond worth keeping. As the music began, and the hall filled with dancing and laughter, Elena stood beside Kellen, no longer the invisible girl at the edge of the table, but the Luna, the entire pack now celebrated, bonded not only by an ancient pull neither of them had asked for, but by a love they had built together, choice by choice, through every challenge fate had placed before them. The feast continued long into the night, filled with warmth and celebration, and somewhere beyond the estate walls, the northern border stood quiet and secure, watched over by a pack united, strong, and ready to face whatever the future might still hold, together.